Hi everyone and welcome back to Retro Legends. In the heart of the 80s, as the console market was slowly emerging from the shadow of the video game crash, Nintendo found itself in a unique position. The Famicom was dominating Japan, redefining the concept of the home console and turning video games into a mass-market product. And yet, behind that success, there was a clear limitation: the cartridges. Expensive to produce, limited in content, slow to update. Nintendo knew that model wouldn't be enough forever. So, in 1986, they did something radical. They introduced an expansion that promised bigger, cheaper, and more flexible games. A system that today seems forgotten, but at the time represented the future. That idea was called the Famicom Disk System. And for a brief, intense period, it truly seemed like the next evolution of home gaming. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Let's get started. In 1985, the Famicom was a huge hit, but the way it was made was already starting to show problems. Game cartridges were dependable and loaded super fast, but they came with a strict way of doing things, making them ahead of time, needing places to store them, costing a lot to start, and leaving very little room for mistakes. For Nintendo and other game makers, every game was a gamble. If they guessed wrong about how many would sell, they'd end up with warehouses full of games nobody bought. This made it hard to try new things, make games for small groups of people, or create games that were more complicated and not instantly popular. But the biggest problem was memory. In the mid-80s, if you wanted a cartridge to hold more, it directly cost more to make each one. Every extra bit of memory had a price, and that price was added to every single game made. This rule directly affected how games were made. Shorter levels, using the same pictures over and over, stories that jumped around, and ways to move through the game that were cut short. People weren't running out of ideas, but the way games were made it better to keep things simple and punish those who wanted to do big, new things. At the same time, Nintendo was watching another sector move in the opposite direction. In the Japanese home computer market, the floppy disk was establishing itself as a flexible and accessible medium. It was rewritable, drastically reduced duplication costs, and allowed for continuous updates without the need for complete physical reprints. Most importantly, it shifted the value from the medium to the content. The container no longer determined the price, but rather the software experience. Bringing this model into the console world meant rethinking the entire ecosystem, not just the storage medium, but the relationship between manufacturer, developer, and consumer. The Famicom Disk System was born precisely from this industrial vision, even before a technological one. The goal was not simply to offer more space, but to reduce economic risk, lower the entry barrier for new content, and create a more flexible system capable of adapting to a rapidly evolving market. In this sense, the disk system should not be seen as an optional accessory, but as a conscious attempt to overcome the structural limits of the cartridge model, anticipating a transformation that the industry would only complete many years later. When the Famicom Disk System came out in February 1986, Nintendo made a clear choice: not to replace the Famicom, but to make it bigger. This choice was a big deal. By making the disk system an extra part, they could use all the Famicom consoles already out there, which made it less risky for the company and helped people start using it faster. The main part of the system is the RAM adapter, a very important piece that people often don't notice enough. It's not just a cable to connect things, but it makes the Famicom able to use a totally different kind of game storage than the old cartridges. The disc cards, even though they looked like 3-inch floppy disks, were a special kind of disc made just for game consoles. They didn't need to work with everything, but Nintendo wanted to be in charge of them. Nintendo made these discs so they could control how games were made, sold, and used without much outside help. This fit perfectly with how Nintendo always did things. They wanted to make new stuff, but always keep control over everything from start to finish. The disk system wasn't just a cool new piece of tech, it changed how games were made and played. Bigger games meant that game makers could create stories that flowed better, with more detailed adventures and lots of new things to see and do. You could save your game right on the disk. Back then, you usually had to write down long passwords. This made playing games feel much more connected, like a continuous story, not a bunch of separate parts. It cost less to make these games, which meant game creators could try out new ideas that would have been too expensive to put on cartridges. And you could even rewrite games at special kiosks. This was the first time games weren't just a finished product you bought once. For Nintendo, all these things weren't just nice extras. The disk system was a big part of their plan to make the Famicom better, last longer, and keep up with new changes in gaming. It wasn't just a small experiment or a fancy add-on. It was a clear effort to change what a home game console could be in the middle of the 1980s, predicting things that the rest of the world would only catch on to much later. One of the most radical elements of the Famicom Disk System ecosystem isn't the home hardware, but what happens outside the living room. The disk writer represents a big change in how games are given out. Nintendo moves some of the shopping experience from the actual game box to a service. These kiosks, which were in many Japanese stores, made the store itself feel like a part of the game system. This meant fewer steps between Nintendo and the players. From a business point of view, this was a very clever idea. Nintendo made it much easier for people to buy games. The first disc card didn't cost much, and rewriting a game was cheap enough to make people want to do it again and again. This changed how people played games. A game wasn't something you thought hard about and then kept forever. It was more like a flowing, almost temporary thing you could change, update, or swap out. In a world where game cartridges were expensive and couldn't be changed, this was a completely new way of doing things. There's also a less obvious but crucial strategic advantage. The disk writer allows Nintendo to directly control content distribution. Every rewrite goes through an official infrastructure, reducing reliance on traditional physical production and offering the company a clearer view of actual demand. It's a primitive, yet effective form of consumption tracking, in an era where the very concept of analytics applied to video games was non-existent. At the same time, however, this system introduces a structural fragility. The model only works as long as the infrastructure is active, maintained, and widely distributed. It depends on consumer trust that those kiosks will continue to exist and be supported. Unlike the cartridge, which lives independently of its context, the disk system ties the value of the software to an external physical network. It's an extremely modern vision, but also exposed to logistical, economic, and cultural factors that are difficult to control. The disk writer anticipates the future, but does so in an era not yet ready to fully support it. It's a really smart, well thought out, even groundbreaking idea. It shows how much Nintendo was already thinking about how everything works together and how to offer good service. But because it was so advanced, it was also easy to break. It needed everything to be just right: the technology, the market, and what people were used to. It was an idea that was way ahead of its time, so it ended up showing both how amazing it could be and where it fell short. From a technical standpoint, the Famicom Disk System doesn't just add space, but it really changes how game makers can design a game. The disks can hold a lot more information, and you can use both sides of them. This means you can handle game data in a much more flexible way. Not everything has to be loaded and ready all at once, like it is with the old game cartridges. This opens the door for bigger game worlds, smoother stories, and using game resources smarter. Things like levels, events, and other game stuff can be put in order, one after another, instead of being squished together. This helps the game design a lot. Levels can feel more open, not just in how big they are, but in how different they look inside. You get more unique pictures, less repeating of the same old stuff, and more differences between different parts of the game and different situations. Even the story gets better with this freedom. Since they don't have to worry about running out of space, games can have longer introductions, little story breaks, conversations, and a story that flows more smoothly. It's not like modern storytelling yet, but it's a big step away from the simple, quick arcade games that were common on the regular Famicom. Perhaps the most underrated aspect is the audio. The extra sound chip built into the disk system isn't just a simple quality upgrade, but it changes how the console's music works. Game music gets more layers, with more complex tunes and deeper sounds. Music stops being just background noise and starts to create a mood and give the game its own feel, helping the experience just as much as the pictures on screen. So, the disk system doesn't just bring bigger games, but games made in a whole new way. Having more space, better sound, and built-in saves makes game makers think about games that keep going, where things change and where your game progress stays. This is where the real new ideas come from. A new way to design games that isn't so focused on being short and doing the same things over and over. Instead, it's about making worlds that make sense, long adventures, and games you can play for a while. It was a quiet but very important change that set the stage for many of the things we see in games today. The disk system really shows its power when we look at the games that truly used what it could do. The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and Kid Icarus aren't just games that came out on that system. They were made with its limits in mind, and most importantly, with all the freedom it offered. The disk system let Nintendo finally move past the idea of a game being just a bunch of separate levels, and instead create games where you could explore freely, where your memory mattered and your progress stayed with you. For The Legend of Zelda, being able to save your game wasn't just a small detail, it was the main reason the game worked. A huge world, where you didn't have to follow a straight path, that let you explore on your own and find things slowly, would have been impossible without a way to save your game and without more storage space than regular game cartridges. The game doesn't ask you to finish it all at once. It asks you to live in it, explore it, and remember it. This was a big change that made players think about games in a whole new way. Metroid uses the same idea in an even bigger way. It doesn't have a straight path, the map is all connected, and going back to old areas is a big part of the game. Also, your character gets stronger over time. All of this needs a game structure that lets you keep coming back and building on what you've done. So, the disk system wasn't just a way to store more game data. It was the tech that made such a big game design possible, totally different from arcade games where you play once and you're done. Kid Icarus is another example, but in a different way. It mixes different types of games, lets your character grow, and has a game structure that was pretty unusual for its time. The game's difficulty was set up so you'd play it many times, and you had to learn and get better as you played. Again, the disc format allowed for a longer, more complex game that wasn't over quickly. It was made for players who wanted to spend a lot of time with a game. The main thing is that these games didn't become popular the disk system, but of it. The technical things the disk system could do let Nintendo try out new ways to build games, new game speeds, and new ways for players to get involved. This is where whole new kinds of games were born, like modern action-adventure games, Metroidvania games, and exploring open maps as the main way to play. The disk system wasn't just a short-lived piece of technology, but the foundation on which Nintendo built its gaming style for many years to come. Even with its really smart ideas, the disk system also had some big problems that over time made it hard to keep going. The disks, which use magnets, are just naturally more delicate than game cartridges. They can get messed up by dust, wet air, magnets, and just from being used a lot. When you use them a lot, games start having trouble loading, they take longer to start, and the whole experience isn't as quick and smooth as playing games on a cartridge, which is what made the Famicom so popular. And there's another thing people often forget. The disk system needs batteries to work. They probably did this to keep the price low, but it added something that could go wrong. If the batteries died, your game saves could be lost. Things wouldn't work right, and it just felt less dependable than a system that didn't need batteries at all. On the business side, the biggest problem was piracy. The discs, even though they were special to Nintendo, were much easier to copy than cartridges, which needed special computer chips and ways of making them that only Nintendo controlled. This made one of the main parts of Nintendo's business plan weaker, which was to have full control over making and selling their games. Even though it wasn't a huge problem right away, just the chance of people making illegal copies was a big risk that Nintendo couldn't ignore. And then there was the issue of how everything was set up. The disk writers, which were key to the whole system, needed to be fixed often, updated regularly, and needed people who knew how to use them. Each machine cost money to keep running. Every time one broke down, it stopped working, and every store was an important place to manage. What looked like a smart and new system on paper in reality was hard to make bigger and tough to keep working over time. The disk system didn't fail because of just one problem, but because many small problems, technical, logistical, and strategic, all added up, slowly making it less and less useful. As the second half of the 1980s unfolded, the technological landscape that had made the disk system an almost mandatory solution began to change rapidly. Advances in semiconductor manufacturing allowed Nintendo to use ever larger ROM chips without skyrocketing costs. More advanced mappers, extra memory, and built-in batteries made possible what had been unthinkable just a few years before. Complex, lengthy games with intricate structures and permanent saves, all within a solid, immediate, and reliable cartridge. This shift had a direct impact on the strategic value of the disk system. Its main promises, more space, lower costs, and save features, were no longer a competitive advantage. On the contrary, the disk format began to reveal only its drawbacks: longer loading times, greater physical fragility, and an expensive infrastructure to maintain. In a market that rewards reliability and ease of use, the cartridge once again became not only the safest choice, but also the most efficient. From a business point of view, Nintendo realized that keeping two separate systems going wasn't working anymore. If they kept putting money into the disk system, it would mean making games harder to create, making it tougher to get games to people, and keeping up a system that wasn't giving them enough back. So, the choice to slowly stop supporting it wasn't sudden. It came from a clear understanding. The system had done its job, but the world had moved on. When, in 1989, the disk system was basically put aside, there wasn't a big announcement or a formal closing. It just stopped being important. The fact that it was never sold outside of Japan fits with this idea. Nintendo knew it was a temporary fix, connected to a special time in the Famicom's story, not something that would shape the company's future all over the world. The disk system wasn't beaten by another company. Instead, it was left behind by the very progress in technology that it helped to speed up. The number of about 4.4 million units sold needs to be looked at in the right way. By itself, it wasn't a flop, especially since the disk system was an extra piece of equipment, not a game console on its own. But if you compare it to how many Famicom consoles were out there, which was a huge number in Japan by then, you can clearly see a big difference. The disk system never became something everyone had. It stayed an extra part that only some people bought. This small number of people who bought it was because of a few things. For one, the extra equipment cost more money, a good amount for that time, and it made things a bit harder. You had discs to keep track of, batteries to change, and games took longer to load. On the other hand, its good points were really only noticed by people who liked trying out new, longer, and less simple games. Most people, the ones who buy a lot of things, still liked how easy and reliable game cartridges were. But from a creative side, the disk system really hit the mark. It became a place for trying out new things in a controlled way, where Nintendo and its friends could take more chances, test out new ways to make games, new ways for stories to unfold, and new tech ideas. It's a system that helps new ideas grow, but because of this, it only appealed to players who were more aware, more involved, and not just playing for fun sometimes. The result might seem strange, but it's not. The disk system had a huge effect on how Nintendo video games were made, but it didn't sell to a lot of people. People remember it for what it made possible, not for how many units it sold. It was more like a lab for ideas than a product for everyone. And in this way, its success was real, but only for some people, limited to those who were ready to follow its ideas all the way. Today, the Famicom Disk System is often called a project that was too early for its time. But this idea can be a bit fuzzy if we don't look at it more closely. Its true strength wasn't just in its new tech ideas, but in how it changed the way video games were sold and played on consoles. With the disk system, Nintendo tried to move away from a finished physical game to something that could change, something that could be updated and grow over time. This was a big new idea for a market that, in the mid-80s, still really liked owning physical things and having them forever. The problem was that the world wasn't ready for this idea yet. People didn't understand the idea of changing games on a disc. Stores had to deal with complicated machines like the disc writers, and even though the magnetic discs were cheap, they weren't strong enough for everyone to use without problems. On top of that, there was a cultural hurdle. People thought a game was something you bought once and owned forever, not something that could be changed or was only temporary. So, the disk system found itself in a bit of a tricky spot. It was too far ahead of its time for people to really get it, but it wasn't strong enough to become the new normal. Its good ideas would only be picked up and made common much later, when technology, what people like to buy, and internet systems would make those ideas, which seemed super weird in 1986, totally normal. Because of this, we shouldn't think of the disk system as a flop, but as something that helped us get from one place to another. It was like a bridge between games on cartridges and the future of getting games online. It didn't change the market right away, but it did help change how Nintendo and the whole game industry started to see video games as something that could grow and change, not just stay the same. The Famicom Disk System was not a failure. It was a step in between, one of those times when an industry pauses for a moment, tries new things, takes risks, and gets ready for what's coming next. It was a bold idea, almost groundbreaking for its time. Games you could write over, cheaper ways to get games to people, built-in saves, a new way to enjoy video games. In a time when cartridges ruled, the disk system showed that there were other ways, that the format wasn't a cage, but a choice in how things were made. Because of it, Nintendo learned to think beyond just the machines themselves. They started to think about the whole system, about making things easy to use, about services, about how everything fit together. These are ideas we take for granted today, but back then, they were just unheard of. Many of the games that came out on it weren't just popular games. They became the building blocks of how we play games today. They helped create game types, ways of talking about games, and how games feel to play. They showed that new ideas don't just come from powerful machines, but from a clear plan. The disk system didn't last very long. That's true. But its importance isn't in how long it sold, but in the big ideas it brought. It showed that the future of gaming wouldn't just be about faster chips and better graphics, but about how games are given to people, saved, updated, and enjoyed. And its impact is everywhere, in how we save games today, in buying games online, in consoles becoming platforms, in the very idea of games as a service. Because sometimes, in the history of video games, it's not the one that stays on the market the longest that wins. It's the one that's brave enough to show a new way forward, even if others are the ones who follow that path all the way. And with that, our trip down memory lane comes to an end. How many of these fun facts did you already know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell so you don't miss more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Thanks for watching Retro Legends, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends.